Rebecca's voice hardened, her eyes hard with annoyance. The entire cabin was silent, all eyes on the confrontation that was taking place. Rebecca felt a glimmer of excitement in her heart. This woman, in a simple navy suit, her expression calm, was stubborn and determined, but Rebecca had seen many passengers like this. Women who thought that if they were calm and composed, they could overwhelm her. But Rebecca knew better. With years of experience in the industry, she understood that the more she encountered such people, the more determined she was to assert her control. Rebecca took a deep breath, straightened up, her voice cutting through the tension. "I told you to move to the back of the plane. Now I tell you to do it now. Don't make me call security." Her words came out as a final warning. Rebecca didn't realize that the entire cabin had fallen silent. The sound of the engines, the clinking of glasses, the murmurs of the passengers, all of it seemed to have disappeared. The air felt heavy, tense, as if some invisible force had overpowered everything just from her words. And then, in a surprisingly gentle tone, the woman replied, "I told you, I'm not moving." She spoke simply, calmly, but there was an undeniable force in her words, an invisible, steady energy, as if she had long ago decided that nothing could shake her. Rebecca hesitated, not expecting the woman to flatly refuse her request, a request that most passengers would have easily accepted without any objection. As the tension between them seemed to grow, Rebecca realized she had underestimated this woman. But what happened next? No one, not even Rebecca, could have imagined. The woman, whom they had all assumed was a regular passenger, rose slowly, with unexpected grace. Her steps were steady, her gaze calmly scanning the cabin before resting once more on Rebecca. Without a word, she took a shiny silver card from her pocket and held it out to the stewardess. Rebecca's entire body froze as her eyes fell on the bold, sharp name. Elliot Brooks, CEO and founder of one of the country's largest technology companies. He owned this plane, but more than that, he owned an empire. The entire cabin suddenly shook. Everyone fell silent. No one dared to breathe loudly. No one had any doubts anymore. This woman was not an ordinary passenger. She was a powerful person, someone the entire flight had never known about until now. The air around Rebecca became heavy, filled with confusion. The passengers, once again, fell silent. No one had expected this. Not the stewardess, not the passengers, and not even the woman, who had remained silent, modest, and calm throughout the journey, had seen this coming. But now, it all makes sense. Rebecca is just a small part of a larger story, a story that is only beginning to unfold. Ava Cole stepped onto her private jet, her steps light but confident on the polished wooden floor. She wore a dark blue blazer that accentuated her slim figure and calm demeanor, an image that exuded power without being ostentatious. Even though she was a black woman, her gaze carried a quiet power that captivated those who met her. Ava's eyes were deep, as if containing thoughts, stories that had never been told. A small smile played on her lips, but no one could guess what was hidden in her mind. The entire cabin was designed with absolute luxury. The leather seats were covered in luxurious brown. The glossy surface seemed to have been carefully crafted in every detail. Every stitch was skillful and meticulous. The soft golden light from the crystal chandeliers shone down, creating a warm and charming atmosphere, making everything in the cabin sparkle, like a space reserved only for those who belonged to the upper class. Ava walked past the VIP passengers who were relaxing, holding glasses of champagne, the sweet scent of the high-class drink wafting through the quiet space. Soft, melodious music played from the high-class speakers, as if to soothe all the tension. The passengers, each with a phone, a tablet, or a book, were enjoying this quiet and comfortable space, but no one realized that this plane did not belong to any of them. None of them knew that, among them, there was a woman who owned an empire. Ava was in no hurry. Her every step was light, yet determined. She reached out to gently tuck the scarf over her shoulders, her eyes quickly scanning the passengers, stopping briefly at each one, but not revealing any sign of herself. Their eyes only passed her by involuntarily. No one in the cabin knew that Ava Cole, the simple woman who was entering the cabin, was the one who held the ultimate power on this flight. She was not just a passenger, but the one who controlled the entire world on this plane. But Ava preferred to keep that secret to herself, at least until the official moment came. Before she boarded her private jet, Ava caught a small glimpse of something that made her stop. The young technician, Malik, a black man in his 20s, was standing before his superior. Malik's face was filled with confusion and concern as his boss loudly criticized him for the system failure that had delayed the flight. The harsh, hasty words not only confused the young man, but also made Ava's heart sink. She could sense injustice in the air and undeserved disrespect for Malik, even though he had done nothing wrong. Ava stood at a distance, observing for a moment, then shook her head slightly. She did not flaunt her power, but her every move exuded a gentle, determined strength. As she approached, her gaze was unhurried, but not weak either. She stood between the two, just enough to attract attention, but still calm enough not to scream. Actually, the delay wasn't Malik's fault. I reviewed the system myself. It was a reboot issue, Ava said, her voice calm, but each word carried an irresistible weight. The short sentence instantly eased the tension around them, like a breeze carrying relief. Malik looked up, surprised and grateful, but didn't dare say anything. Ava's intervention, though gentle, acted as a shield protecting him from unnecessary criticism. Malik's superiors and those around him were silent, with no further excuses. Ava didn't need to say much, because her power didn't come from showing off, but from being honest and consistent in her actions. After confirming the truth, Ava didn't look at Malik again, just nodded slightly and continued to walk onto the plane, not waiting for thanks or praise. She didn't do this to gain respect from others. She did it because it was the right thing to do. That brief moment, though not particularly dramatic, made Ava a true example of leadership. She was someone who not only protected those who needed protecting, but also knew how to act in the right place at the right time. A leader who understood that true power lies not in power or position, but in the ability to do the right thing without making a fuss. As Ava entered the cabin, her gaze was unhurried, but she could not help but notice the chief flight attendant, Tina Moore, standing right next to the boarding door, ready to greet each passenger. Tina, looking impeccable in her airline uniform, possessed an air of absolute control, sharp eyes, and a bright smile honed over years of working in the high-end service industry. But behind that smile, Ava recognized a subtle distinction that Tina did not try to hide, although it was only a subtle sign, but enough to notice. Tina bowed to greet each passenger, her every move carefully calculated, her every choice considered. The white passengers were greeted warmly, with friendly greetings and eyes sparkling with attention. But when Tina's eyes drifted to Ava, the change in her expression was unmistakable. The smile, which had been charming and natural with the other passengers, now seemed forced, cold, as if Ava were not the customer who deserved such attention. "Are you sure you're in the right section, ma'am?" Tina asked, her tone gentle, but the question was a challenge. Her words were not a welcome, but a strange, suspicious look, as if Ava could not possibly be a passenger in this expensive section. It seemed that the presence of Ava, a black woman, in this section made Tina feel uncomfortable. The unspoken question was not just a casual greeting, but a clear distinction, a sign of the invisible division between those who were welcomed and those who were suspected. Ava, her gaze unwavering, simply nodded. She didn't need to respond, because she didn't feel the slightest need to prove who she was. The air around them suddenly felt heavy, as if an invisible wall had been erected between them. But Ava stood there expressionless, as if she was used to such distinctions. She wasn't angry, not sad, just surprisingly calm. A female leader never needed to prove herself. Her power lay in her strong silence, in how she faced even the smallest challenges. After a moment of silence, Tina finally nodded without another word and turned back to her work. But Ava, with her unshakable confidence, just walked past lightly, leaving no trace but a calm as if nothing had happened. The atmosphere in the cabin, which had been calm and quiet, gradually became tense. Ava, still calm, sat firmly in her first-class seat, enjoying the privacy and quiet of the flight. But not long after, Tina, the chief flight attendant, with an annoyed expression, approached again. She stood up straight, her eyes fixed on Ava, as if trying to break the peace she had created. "Excuse me, ma'am," Tina said in a sharp tone, deliberately asserting her authority. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to the back of the plane. This seat is for other passengers who are better suited." Tina's words were not simply a request, but a discriminatory insinuation. A cold look accompanied her words, as if Ava was unqualified to occupy a seat in first class. It was a clear disdain, but Ava's expression did not change. In a calm voice, Ava replied softly, as if nothing had happened. "My seat is here, and I'm not moving." She didn't get angry, didn't protest, simply asserted her rights with an unshakable calm. There was no argument, no aggression, just a confident and steadfast statement. But Tina didn't stop there. She started to raise her voice, gaining the attention of the entire cabin. "I said move." Tina's voice rang out, loud enough that every passenger around her started to turn to look at them. A sense of tension began to settle in the air, a wave of tension from the curious and uncomfortable gazes that were being directed at Ava. A few passengers in the cabin couldn't contain their curiosity and took out their phones and started filming. They could sense the tension escalating, and the atmosphere was getting heavy. The small screens flashed with the first images, recording the confrontation between the powerful chief flight attendant and the calm, unflinching passenger. Ava noticed, but she didn't care. She sat there, eyes forward, unhurried, unbowed. It wasn't Ava's silence that bothered Tina. It was her confidence and assertiveness. A woman who knew who she was and didn't need to prove it to anyone. Tina, with a stiff expression, took out her phone and immediately called the security. She was impatient, just wanted to end this confrontation quickly, thinking that the appearance of the security would make Ava give in. But as soon as the cabin door opened, a senior staff member walked in from behind, his eyes looking straight at Ava with obvious surprise. This person, in a neat uniform, immediately recognized the person they did not expect to be on this flight. "Miss Cole?" the attendant said respectfully, bowing his head. "I'm so sorry, we weren't expecting you on this flight." His words rang out like a bell, shaking the air in the cabin. Every eye in the cabin turned to Ava. No one could have guessed that the woman sitting silently was the one they thought was a normal passenger. They hadn't even realized her strength and power. Tina now stood still, eyes wide, unable to believe what she had just heard. She stammered, "Wait, you're Ava Cole, as in Cole Aviation?" Tina's question was full of surprise and confusion, unable to understand why the woman she had just confronted was the owner of one of the largest airlines in the world. Ava Cole. That name was no longer strange to anyone, but in this cabin, no one thought she was the person they had heard of. Everything they thought about her suddenly became meaningless. Ava didn't respond immediately. She just nodded, a simple yet meaningful gesture that seemed to say everything that needed to be said without adding another word. Without complaining, without raising her voice, she let everyone figure it out. And in that moment, the silence fell, the air in the cabin heavy, as if everyone had taken a collective breath of surprise and confusion. Not that she felt the need to explain or prove anything. Ava Cole didn't need to do anything more. She just sat quietly, letting everyone understand that sometimes power doesn't need to be loudly spoken, but it can be demonstrated through a gentle action, but enough to change everything. There was no direct command from Ava, but her authority was palpable. A senior airline executive who had recognized Ava from the start stepped forward with a calm but stern demeanor. "Miss Moore," he said, his voice cold and firm, "please step off the aircraft immediately. We'll be discussing your conduct." These words were like a strong slap, making Tina's face pale, unable to resist. Her whole body stiffened, her hands trembling as she heard the order. In the cabin, which was originally filled with silence and tension, a few passengers could not contain their surprise and delight. A few people started to clap lightly, as if in recognition of what they had just witnessed. There was a long moment of silence, only to break into quiet but powerful applause. They were not clapping because of this handling, but because of what they had just witnessed. The fairness, the propriety, and the power of the woman they had once considered invisible, now completely changing the scene. Ava didn't respond. She didn't need to do anything. She just sat there, staring calmly out the window. It was all decided, and she didn't need to say anything. Like a true leader, she didn't need flowery words, didn't need to rush into action. It had been clear from the start, and the woman sitting there, as calm as if nothing had happened, proved that power never needed to be shouted. It was simply presence, confidence, and timing. As the jet began to climb, skimming through the thick clouds, Ava sat quietly by the window, her eyes absorbed in the vastness outside. The entire cabin seemed quiet, but in her mind a deep dialogue was going on. Her own reflection in the glass was a symbol of calm, not because she felt nothing, but because she understood that everything happened for a reason. The clouds drifted by like thoughts passing through her mind, and Ava knew that today was more than just a confrontation. This was a turning point. A reminder that dignity is not something you fight for. It is something you recognize in others and respect in yourself. Without a public statement, Ava wrote a message, short but all-encompassing. She not only denounced discrimination, but also laid out a clear vision of the future she wanted. Luxury isn't just what you see, it's how you make others feel, she wrote, each word carrying the weight of change. I'm changing company policy. No more silent biases. Everyone on board, regardless of color, status, or background, deserves respect. Ava's statement is not just a policy statement, it's a human statement. She doesn't need to speak loudly, because her strength lies in how she acts, how she confronts injustice, and how she leads change from the ground up. The plane now surpasses the clouds, the mountains, and the boundaries of segregation. Like the clouds, anything is possible when you see the way forward, when you have the courage to change and believe in equality.